Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whatever time you're receiving this. My name is Andre Bright, architect, dancer, and executive coach. And this is the Day Burnout series. This is the live series, in fact. So this is 6 a.m. UK time every morning in May. I'm going to be going on live and speaking about a specific element of burnout. And for those of you who are asking what Day means, it is I can do anything, not everything. This idea that even under burnout, a lot of the times we are overwhelmed with tasks that we know we clearly could do, but in that moment we don't have the energy to. We are overwhelmed by sometimes even the simplest tasks, but there are reasons behind that. Some of them might be physical, emotional, mental, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. What are the signs and symptoms of burnout? So, if you've been paying attention to what I've been doing on LinkedIn, then you might be familiar with the talks I've been doing every Wednesday, 7 p.m. UK time. And in that case, we take people, I've got a panel of people on each week, and we discuss a specific element of the topic. So, what I did was I took um, the main definition of burnout into its three components: emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, a reduced sense of self-accomplishment. And then I added in overwhelm on the fifth week. The first week was just an introduction to burnout. And if you're not familiar with burnout, I'm just going to give like a brief overview of what those things are. Emotional exhaustion is having nothing left in your tank to feel. You, as someone put it, you've cared too much for too long, and you're exhausted emotionally. So even when there's physical things that might be easy to do, you have no emotional energy to face them. Depersonalization is that feeling of feeling out of yourself. You become emotionally detached from yourself, and it's the way I describe it is, if you've seen the movie Get Out, it's the sunken place where you may feel like you're in robot mode. You may have lose track of time, and hours seem to disappear, and you've lost connection with what is happening around you. And then lower sense of personal achievement is you feeling like nothing you do matters. It's going to be insubstantial. There's no point. Um, you feel insignificant, maybe, as a result. Those are the three main ways. And then there's overwhelm, which is the idea of being, you drown under the pressures, internally and externally, and you find it difficult to do the task that needs to be done. If I was to break things down simply, that's how I would describe them. So today we're talking about signs and symptoms. So how do you know when you're finding yourself in a situation where you may be experiencing burnout? One of the things I've learned from holding this space the last few weeks, all this started from working with companies and going into there and working with their employees, working with their teams. And one of the things that kept coming up is this idea of burnout in its many forms. So often what seems to happen is people are experiencing it without realizing that's what they're experiencing. But then once I give the definition, they said, yeah, that's what it is. And once they know what it is, then they can do something about it. But then how do you know you're experiencing it? I've given you the definition of what it is, but it's not necessarily clear what it is until you look at what the symptoms are. And they can come in many ways. And I'm going to go through 5 main ways, right? Physical, emotional, mental, behavior. And physical, emotional, mental, behavior, and relationships. So let's go through some of those and we can see what we've got. So physical is your physical body, right? This may look at fatigue, It may be headaches. It may be muscle tension, like tension in your body. Um, Changes in your appetite, your diet, your sleeping patterns, things like that. You may come up in physical illness like rashes and things like that. Basically, burnout is prolonged stress. So it's not necessarily you feel like you have a task ahead of you and it's causing you distress. That in itself is not burnout. Burnout happens when it's happening over a prolonged period of time. And what we know about stress is that it is tension within body, and it shows up on the surface a lot of the time. So I'm just going to go through some of those. Fatigue, you feel tired all the time. You might eat well, you might try and do physical activity and all that kind of stuff, but you feel tired. And one of the things I would be specific about here is not in this case we're talking about physical tired. Your body is tired. You know, you're constantly in a state of you're lethargic. You feel like you're on the verge of sleep. You know, you're losing your concentration a lot of the time. We'll come to that in a second in mental, right? But then you also have headaches. This is something that's really popular. Sometimes they come out in headaches, sometimes even as bad as migraines. You might find yourself, and it's not just a matter of being dehydrated. It's something deeper than that. Muscle tension. One of the things I like about meditation and guided meditation or working with you through your breathing, for example, is one of the exercises they'll do is they'll say, okay, now relax the tension in your jaw. All of a sudden you realize you've been clenching this whole time. You didn't even realize it, right? Relax there, drop your shoulders. This whole time I've been up here and I haven't even realized, right? Loosen the grip in your hands, for example. A lot of this stuff is happening subconsciously. You may not even realize it, but through prolonged stress, you feel the tension in your body. You're tense all the time, you're tight. And that can be causing all this other stuff as well. And then you got changes of appetite. You know, you can't eat. You're not hungry anymore. Or you overeat and you go to things like sugary substances to um, try and give you those endorphins to give you that positive feeling that sugar gives you, right? So when it comes to those kind of things, there's also things like sleep, and we know how important sleep is to us. Without sleep, we don't recharge, we don't regenerate, we don't energize. But if you can't sleep, it will mean that you can't reset, you can't build your energy. And sleep is not just about closing your eyes and being up subconscious and seeing hallucinations, right? Sleep is also about what your body does to reset itself each day. It needs that. A third of our lives are meant to be ish in sleep. If you're sleeping for 8 hours a day, that's a third of your day, which means it's a third of your life. That's how much sleep we need, really, to be highly functional. And what ends up happening is if we don't have sleep, we'll be like, oh, I can do without. But then we don't realize the effect is happening. We really do have the adequate amounts of sleep. And then what ends up happening as well is when we do have the adequate amounts of sleep, our body then tells us, okay, cool, we're actually being able to reset now. And it tries to catch up on lost time, which is why sometimes we can have an actual long time of sleep, but then feel even more tired when we wake up, is because our body's trying to catch up on all the sleep we've lost. And you may not realize how much it's like being under the influence of alcohol and not realizing it's like, oh no, don't worry, I'm fine. I can drive home. You know, oh no, no worry, I'm fine. But then you only realize how bad it is because you've been under the influence for so long, right? The same way with sleep. If you've been under the influence for so long, you don't realize how tired you actually are until you actually get that rest. The second symptom. So this is the one I've talked about physical fatigue, for example. This is emotional fatigue. This is the one where you're emotionally drained. You don't have the energy to care anymore. You can't, especially if you're a giver or if you're the person people come to for their problems, You just can't take on anyone else's distress anymore. Like, um you can't see anything else on the news that's going terrible. You can't care anymore. Like you've your capacity for caring has been exhausted, you know. Um this might be you might be irritable, your patience draws thin all the time. You snap when people are doing the simplest things around you. You might experience mood swings. One minute you're fine, one minute you're furious, and it might be over something that's completely, um, what's it called, disproportional to whatever might be going on, right? Something happen and you react through something huge. You might feel anxious, you know, in the body, right, in the mind, and you feel yourself worrying all the time, and your mind is completely drawn to the negative possibilities. One of the things that's interesting about the imagination is in the future we can't control, right, as well as we can't control the past has happened, but in the future we can't control, and so anything that could happen is just as possible. What we tend to do is we overthink, and we're drawn towards negative. So if you're starting a business, it's very possible that you could go huge. It could be very successful, but it's possible that it could fail. Both are possible, but only one is the one that controls our mind, right? We're only thinking about the possibility that everything will go wrong. But if we have the to choose, because none of it's happened yet, why do we always go towards negative? When you're experiencing burnout, you're absolutely drawn towards that negative, and it adds more emotional and mental pressure. Then you've got the idea of detachment. You feel like you're going in, I mentioned this before in the definition, robot mode. You don't feel anything anymore. Something incredible could happen, you don't feel anything. Something terrible will happen, you don't feel anything. This is one of the ways it shows up for me, and it always acts as a red flag, you know. Or cynicism, like you're like, oh, this, if, again, going back to what I said about anxiety, thinking about the negative, and it showing up in the body and the mind, you're thinking, oh, this will never work, or oh, no one will ever believe me, or I don't mean anything. Everything is drawn towards that negative. Some of the emotional things, because if you feel this in your body, right, it can show up as tension in your body. It can show up as um, something caught up in your throat. It can show up as, like I said, emotional exhaustion, like you've stopped caring, or you're tired of caring. You can't take anything else going wrong, or it might destabilize you, right? So that's emotional. The third one is mental. So this one is when you're thinking about things like you're having concentrating. You have this difficulty absorbing information. You might be an avid reader, but you can't get past the first two lines. You know, someone's speaking to you and you're distracted. You find your mind going off in different places, and you have to ask them to repeat it over. Someone tells you their name and you can't remember it. Some people might be really good at names or terrible at names, but even little bits of information that you'd be able to retain, you can't retain. You find yourself having difficulty with memory. There's capacity in your mind, and it seems to be full at all times, or empty at all times, and you can't remember. You Where were my keys? Sure, I thought they were here. You might find them really random places in your house, or you find yourself, driving and not realizing where you're going. Like, where was I going to this morning? I can't remember. Your to-do list, you can't remember those things. You might be sitting yourself in a room in your house, and you can't remember what you went there for. All these things are manifestations of signs of burnout, right? If something has come, like a choice, and you can't decide, you're like, oh my gosh, should I do this? Should I do that? And over time, not making that choice, pressure on you, right? On your mind, because it's taking up the capacity. I genuinely genuinely feel this way, it's a great illustration for me to understand is that we actually have decision fatigue. Each decision you make takes physical energy from the body. It's actually proven, right? It's based around glucose. So decisions take physical energy from the body. So if you have decisions to make and you take too long to make them, it can build up this deficit of glucose in your body, which means that you physically get tired from not making that decision, right? So it gets worse and worse and worse. And then self-talk, you're burning out and you're like, oh man, you're worth nothing, get anything right. Everything is negative, 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 and it adds to this pressure, right? Especially if you're a perfectionist. And perfectionism is something that's celebrated a lot these days, but it also has the dark side. Perfectionism, we know logically we can't achieve perfection, right? But it's celebrated as if it's just a high standard we keep to ourselves. But what ends up happening is, if you're a perfectionist, and you might have experienced this before, you're going to fall short of perfection. And when you do, you're going to beat yourself up about it. And even if you achieve 98%, you're only going to be thinking about the 2% that you didn't get and not thinking about the 98% that you did. And it's either all or nothing. Either I am 100% successful or I'm a failure. And the thing with that is, it ends up psyching about yourself, and it brings you down emotionally. You're beating yourself up. You're tearing yourself down. Over time, that can become exhausting as well. And all of this is to say, and in a way, I would say that those three, I know I said five, but honestly, those three are the main ones to think about: your physical, emotional, and mental symptoms, right? But let me tell you where this can show up in other areas. So those are the actual symptoms. The effects can show up in your behavior. You find yourself being a different person, right? So you might find yourself withdrawn. You want to stay at home all the time. You don't want to go out with your friends. You find yourself having a low social battery. You might find yourself out with your friends, but all of a sudden it switches. You don't want to be in that space anymore. You want to go home. Usually you'd enjoy doing these things. You might enjoy running. You might enjoy playing in the park, painting. You might enjoy music, but all of a sudden you don't. These things don't bring you joy anymore. They don't bring you connection, right? You might find yourself, because those things don't bring you the joy, you're looking for it in other places. You might look for it in alcohol. Usually you might have one glass of wine as a nightcap in the evening. This turned into a bottle, right? You might turn into something that's maybe even harder, right? You find yourself being drawn to these other mechanisms that aren't so healthy for your body, for your mind, for your soul. You might find yourself procrastinating, and procrastination is basically fear of success or failure. There's something about it where you're looking for opportunities to delay this. Sometimes it has benefits because it means that you have more time to think, more time to go through it, etc. But oftentimes, more than not, it's because you're worried about something. Sure, you're scared. You're scared of getting it right, scared of getting it wrong. And then you also have decreased productivity. And this is one that shows up in the workplace a lot, but also it can happen at home, within your relationships. You're usually able to do certain things as you come back from your day, right? You come home, you've got your routine, you're putting the kids to bed, you're watching TV while you're doing this, you listen to your podcast while you're washing the dishes, you're planning for tomorrow, you're calling your friends and your family, you're doing your tax returns, all that kind of stuff. But all of a sudden, you can't do any of that anymore. You might have a hobby, you can't get any of it done. You'll be sitting there in front of your pottery for an hour on end and haven't even started rotating it as they started making it. And the thing what happens to that is, when you're not as productive, you don't have anything to show for your time, which makes you feel even worse. And it becomes this vicious cycle, right? So your behavior change might be something that so an effect of those 3 points before: your mental, physical, and emotional. Another place that it might show up in is your relationships. You might find strains in your relationships. You might find yourself in fights a lot more often with your friends, with your family, with your spouse, right? You might find yourself having communication breakdowns. Oh, that's not what I meant. Yeah, but that's what you said. you know, um, and all this kind of stuff. You might find yourself usually being really good at keeping up in touch with people, but you don't call them anymore. And so that breaks down, and people end up coming at you and being like, you're not as much of a friend there for me when I needed you, not knowing that you might have been in need, but you weren't able to show up for them because you were going through this, right? And you might also feel this idea of isolation and disconnection. Like I said earlier, you find yourself not wanting to be in social situations, even with people that you usually feel good with. You might have your boys or your girls who you meet up with every week. You might go to the bar or pub or someone's house or something like that. And now you just stop picking up the call, stop showing up, and you just don't want to go anywhere. Like, you just want to be at home by yourself. And me, as like someone who lives alone, it's interesting because now I really enjoy my own personal space. And I think some of you might be listening to this thinking, yeah, but I want to be at home because I enjoy time with myself. That's not what I'm talking about. If that is why you're spending time alone. But the problem with the flip side is not wanting to spend time with anybody else. That part, when it grows, can become something that can be a red flag. So just paying attention to that. So that was the effects of the mental, physical, and emotional causes. Can show up effects in behavior, in relationships, and in work, in your performance at work. So you might find yourself not being motivated at work. Usually you're the person who comes out with all these ideas and these um, these tests or these creative ways to meet your targets, etc. You're not really bothered to do that anymore. you know you're usually quite client facing. You're making those relationships between your company and theirs. You're not doing that anymore. You feel it like, okay, cool, I'm usually the one who's going to be ambitious. I'm going to be putting in the extra effort because I want to get that raise and stuff. But now you're drained. It's like, what's the point, right? You're making more mistakes than usual. Sometimes it might start small. It's a typo here and there, but there might be things that are um, more grave. Like, okay, it might be a typo here and there, but this is a number, and this number is actually, uh, cost could be like the cost of millions, depending on the company or the project that you're doing. Yeah, you're not spending as much because of your lack of concentration. You're not able to sit down and look at the details like you would normally. There's absenteeism. Like, maybe obviously you've got statutory sick leave per month, but um, you might find yourself taking more and more time off work and saying to yourself, oh, I can't come in today. you know um, I don't want to come in today. Like, and also lack of engagement in general. Like, people are going out, you don't want to go. Work dues, you're not going. And people are speaking to you at work, not paying attention. There's a presentation on something quite important. You might be for your CPD, for example. Can't concentrate. Yeah. So there's lots of different ways that they can show up. And just to recap, and these are the signs and symptoms, right? So the signs will be physical, emotional, and mental, right? In terms of the symptoms, there's lots of different symptoms, but the ones I'm focusing on here are changes in behavior, relationships, and performance. Yeah. The last thing that I really want to go through is like what you can do about it. Okay, so you notice now that there's some change going on in you, and you're feeling to yourself, "Wow, this is a problem. I need to look at this." One of the things I would say is understanding the difference between burnout and stress. I mentioned this before, but it's worth doubling down on it. Burnout is more severe, and it's chronic, and it's a condition. Okay, stress is actually healthy in some ways. We need stress to get us to work, to get us to move, to get us into action mode. In small doses, we are made to be able to handle stress. The problem is prolonged when it's amplified for a long period of time, and that's when burnout starts to happen. So if there's something that you find yourself, or you're doing a task and you find it really difficult, that is just stress. If it's just the one thing. If you find yourself for weeks, months experiencing that, then you're experiencing burnout. And like I said, it can come from all kinds of things. It might be that you're being given too much at work, but it might be that you're experiencing loss and you've lost, your emotional capacity. It might be that you're experiencing social trauma from watching wars and things on screen all the time, and it feels like, it's happening to you. A lot of these things can have an effect. It might be you moved house or had a new child, and you're experiencing a change in your lifestyle you're trying to get used to and you're really struggling with, or you've had lack of sleep because of some things, or even pandemic. Where there's two sides of things, right? Where you have lots to do and small emotional capacity to do it, or you have huge capacity to do it but nothing to do, which is boredom, which is just as dangerous, right? So in those cases, it requires intervention, some kind of strategy. Speak to someone, and I'll get to that in a second as well. The other thing I'll say is self-assessments. So find yourself online, some kind of checklist or some kind of assessment. There's loads online. Just look out burnout assessment, and they'll ask you questions which will reveal in yourself where burnout might be, what might be showing up. It will help your self-awareness. It help with recognizing what those warning signs are, and also in those around you. One of them I've spoken about now, which I will in future, is how to deal with other people who are experiencing burnout or who you suspect are experiencing burnout, especially if they don't want to be helped. What do you do when you care about someone and they're not allowing you to help, or you can see them deteriorating, or you can see them, or you're the friend who's at the usual weekly gathering and you realize so and so hasn't been here for weeks? What do you do? How do you support them? The third thing is seeking help, and this one is really important. This one has come up in pretty much every session we've done on LinkedIn, is asking for help. One of the patterns I've seen is that sometimes, especially, is some of the people who experience burnout are the ones who people always go to for help. Those are the people on the burdens of everyone, and so feel like they can't be a burden on anyone else, and so they suffer in silence, and they'll become recluse, and the pressure will keep on forming because they feel like they haven't created spaces within their networks where they feel like they can tell the truth, they can be vulnerable. Okay, so when those things happen, we've also got to realize that those people need to speak up, and it's not easy. It's not something I'm saying. It requires a change in mindset, change in behavior. It requires change, but it requires something small first. Telling someone, okay, cool, you know what? Actually, I'm not okay. And I'm not sure what it is. Can we talk? Just that, starting somewhere there, something small, something you can work with. I feel like there's an element of being a giver, for example, where you're so used to giving, you don't know how to receive. And the thing about not receiving is it doesn't give anyone else the opportunity to give to you. And the thing about friendship or connection or relationships in general is it's meant to be two-way. The strongest ones are where both people feel like they're being held by the other. And the problem with you deciding that you're the only one to hold is that you end up not actually building the depth of relationship that you think you are with other people. Because when things go wrong, you feel like you can't go to them. And the thing is, vulnerability and letting people know that actually you're not okay, letting people know that you need their help, all that kind of stuff, gives them the opportunity to show up for you. And when they do, that's what builds trust. When trust is built, that's when you build rapport and depth of relationship. Because if you trust someone, then it means you'll open up even more to them. You'll tell them the whole truth. And the thing is, one of the things I've also seen is that this is why therapy is so good, right? Therapy is, I mean, it is transactional because you're paying them, right? But the thing with therapy is you're having a space dedicated specifically to you. And what ends up happening as a giver or someone who's always been there for other people is even when you are going into a space for you, you end up making it about them. How can I help you? I don't want to burden you, etc. And so, and I get it because I've been there. But it's really important for us to create those relationships, those spaces within our relationships where we feel like we could be honest. So I'm just going to recap. There's 9 things altogether, right? So you got the signs, which is your physical symptoms, fatigue, headaches, rashes, muscle tension, sleep patterns, and food patterns changing. You got emotional symptoms, signs, which is irritability, mood swings, impatience, anxiety, feeling of detachment or cynicism. Then you got mental signs. Or is it symptoms? The words are confusing me now. But yeah, mental, which is um, lack of concentration, memory loss, indecisiveness, negative self-talk, things like that. Then you got the symptoms, which are behavioral, right? So you find yourself withdrawing. You start, falling towards substances, procrastination, decreased productivity, that kind of thing. You've got relationships. This is where it shows up because you have more fights, more conflict. You're having communication breakdowns. You bring yourself into isolation. Your social battery is reduced, right? But you also have performance, right? So you have decreased motivation. You'll have more and more errors that you're making. You find yourself absent and recluse and lack of engagement, that kind of thing, right? 3 things to do about it is to first decipher whether it's burnout or stress. If it's short term over a single task, then it's probably stress. If it's been long term over a period of time, it's self assessment. Actually, look up self assessments, right? And see if you can do yourself one online. For example, there's quite a few on there. Um, and there's actually an assessment form that I've got that I'll put into the comments here, where you can actually say, you can just tick box exercise, and as you get into there, it asks you questions around different parts of your life, and then it shows you whereabouts you might be experiencing it. The third one is seeking help as a friend, as family, but then also professionally. One of the things that we need to do is this idea of identity. I've talked about being a giver or being a person that people unload their burdens to and not wanting to feel like a burden. When that becomes part of our identity, like it becomes who we are to the point where it stops us from seeking help, that's a real problem because then we can't be helped, you know? And so when that happens, if necessary, seek professional help. You might also be thinking, yeah, but I'm not the kind of person who seeks personal help. And which is another thing to be careful of, because what is who is the person who, interrogate that for yourself. Where do those ideas come from? If it's stopping you from actually becoming better, is it going to serve you in any way? The last thing I would say, and this is not a sign, a symptom, or an assessment or anything like that, it's just the importance of early intervention. The moment you feel that there's something going wrong, jump into it, figure it out, spend some time, speak to somebody, whether it's someone who's near you, whether it's professional help, whatever it is, assessment, whatever it is, right? Do it early. The thing with burnout is it increases over time. It gets worse and worse often, not better and better if you don't address it. One of the things that I'm doing is as reading a book called Burnout by Amelia and Emily Nagoski is dealing with the stress and the stressor. The stressor is what is making you feel stressed. And over time, there might be lots of different things that are adding to this accumulative effect of stress over time, which builds up into burnout. The stress is what's happening within your body. It's that tension in your shoulders. It's the heart rate. It's the sweat. It's the emotional detachment. All of those kind of things that's happening internally is how you're feeling, right? So it's important to also look at how to deal with both elements, the external, the internal, when you're looking at how to relieve yourself from burnout. One of the things I also say as well is the fizzy bottle example. If you have a fizzy bottle, everything that happens to you that's negative specifically is like shaking that bottle once. Over time, the pressure builds. And what's going to happen is either the bottle will explode or the drink will go flat. Neither of them is what we want. The way to relieve that is to open that bottle top a little bit and release some of the pressure. So the question is, what are you doing to release some of that pressure? Whether it's emotional, whether it's physical, whether it's mental, right? Is it that you need to spend some time with someone that you love? Is it that you need to speak to someone and actually get it out? Is it that you need a hug? You know, there's actually data that says that we physically need hugs during the day, but then it's significant how long the hugs are. You know, if you have like a 2 or 3 minutes worth of hug where you're standing upright next to each other, so you're not leaning on each other, you're actually just standing upright, but you're just holding each other for a few minutes. It's enough to release a lot of physical tension within the body, which can help you give capacity to look at what the problem actually is. Okay. So it's really important to look at early intervention when things happen, not just for you, but then also for your friends and family if you feel like they're going through it. Um, it can prevent further escalation and promote healing and well-being. Okay. So I hope you find this useful. The all the notes and things are in the comments or the description of this event. If you're going through any of this, if any of this is you felt has been, oh, do you know what? Actually, maybe this is something that I'm experiencing. I would encourage you to, I would encourage you to book a call with me. So what I'll do is I'll put a link within the bio as well. I'd encourage you to book a call with me. It's a 30-minute virtual chat wherever you are in the world. You can sign on. You can book a call with me, and we'll just talk for that time. Right? I have programs. I have resources and things that can help as well. And depending on what you're saying, what you're going through, then we can come up with something if we need something to help you further. But sometimes we just need that space, just a moment in time to say, actually, I've been experiencing this. What do you think it is? Or I've been experiencing this and I don't want to experience it anymore. How can you help? 30 minutes. I would rather that than you find yourself not speaking to anyone at all. So I hope this session has helped. Tomorrow, we're going to carry on with another episode, another topic. If this has been useful to you, like it, repost, share it, let other people know, especially if you think that there are other people who benefit from this as well. This is going to be 6 a.m. UK time every morning in May. If you have any topics or any questions you want me to answer as a separate episode, write them in the comments. Write them in the comments and I'll get back to you. I've got enough topics for the month, but I would easily be I'm happy to remove some of those topics and replace it with something really specific if there's something that you would like me to cover. I hope you have a good day. I hope you speak to someone. I hope you find rest. I hope you find joy, whatever you're doing today. My name is Andre Bright, and I'll see you tomorrow.